My goal in this session is to talk about AI microapps that use free and open source tools, and to have everyone leave this session with the ability to build, customize, and deploy their own microapps. And we will do that through building a simple horoscope app, which is a nice way to demonstrate some of the functionality. And then we'll go through a writing feedback tool. By way of quick introduction, my name is John Swope. I've spent 12 years as an education technology specialist, working mostly in higher education, but across the gamut of open online courses. I do consult on building AI-powered apps, and soon down the road, there will be a fully no-code paid product coming. So that's the whole pitch. That's what makes this whole session free. I'll move on to the microapps themselves. Microapps, like I said, relatively new term. I don't expect folks to know it. What I call microapps are these small, customizable web apps that perform tasks with AI. And the main benefit is that you package and share workflows that leverage AI. So imagine that you are the person at your institution, which if you're here, you probably are. You are the person at your institution that has spent the most time figuring out prompt engineering and how to use AI in your processes. Historically, it has been hard, because this is why I'm building this, because I felt this pain myself. It has been hard to share that knowledge with other people. Either share it in the form of accelerators if you're course building, or share it in the form of assessments for your students. And so microapps try to make that easier by packaging this and making it supremely shareable. So before we get into fields and phases and the terminology, let's look at a couple if you have not seen these yet. So this is a site that I keep, a sandbox site where I keep several of these micro apps. And so an app, an example of an app, often a good first example, is a multiple choice generator. Let's imagine that I am, building a course about Quidditch, and I want some number of questions. I want to have feedback on those questions, and I want them to be university difficulty level. What I can do is build a micro app that kind of packages all my prompting that I would do, exposes the fields to the user, and makes this a nice, easy, clean, shareable micro app, right? Another one that might be a common example is if I'm giving my students a case study. So let's say we're reading a case study about Ebola in this case. I made this a very short case study, so it's easy to understand what's going on. And I want to ask my students about this case study. I can submit this, get feedback from an AI. I am doing scoring. We'll talk a little more about scoring, what we know about scoring right now, to determine if my answer is satisfactory. I can ask my students to define spillover. So these are micro apps. And there's a lot of ways that this template can be leveraged. So I just showed an MCQ generator and a case study, an example of an accelerator app and an assessment app. But I can do things like build a debate with an AI as a micro app. I can build a medical school tutor as a micro app. I can build an alt text generator, which I find very useful to be able to put in images and get alt text back for those images. And several more. SOAP note scoring, generate learning objectives. It's fun to kind of experiment with these and figure out what works well and what doesn't work as well and try to improve those. And again, the power here is not that I can build micro apps, right? I'm a technologist, I can build things, but that it's a template that hopefully makes it easy for others to build micro apps, because everyone has a different idea of how they want to build multiple choice questions. Everyone's got a different assessment that they are delivering to their students. So the goal here is to make it easy so that educators can build their own micro apps. That, I think, is a need as we get into this AI world. So let's go back to the presentation for a moment. So a bit of terminology that's going to be useful. So when we talk about an app, I talk about an app in terms of fields and phases. So micro apps are built by combining fields and phases. So a field captures user input, like we just saw in the multiple choice generator. How many questions do you want? What difficulty level do you want? What's the topic of these questions, right? And then phases process those fields and send a request to the AI to get a response. And then optionally, phases can be scored. So if we look on the right here, our fields are gathering input. Our AI is providing feedback based on a prompt and based on those inputs that we get from a user. And that prompt includes the instructor guidance. So here we have AI that's providing feedback that is also instructor guided. And then optionally, AI can provide a score, and that is also instructor guided by rubrics that the instructor creates. And if we do provide a score, then we check if the student passes. If they don't pass, they get to try that phase again. And if they do pass, they move on to the next phase. If there is no scoring, they just move on to the next phase automatically. the two apps that we just saw, the MCQ generator, just to break this down into examples. So the fields there are enter the content for the questions, specify a learning objective. How many questions do you want? Include learner field. All these are fields. And this particular app is a single phase app because we just put those things in once, we submit it, and that's our phase. And so at that point, the process is done. We get those questions back. Another example would be the case study or a debate, where in this case, we have multiple phases. So the first field asks what is this case study about? The student enters their answer. And in that phase, they get feedback and a score from the AI. The second phase, we're asking students to define a spillover. So we offer a field to them. What is a spillover event? And the phase submits that to AI and gets feedback. Okay, so we're going to move into the installation and configuration here. So if you haven't already seen this or you're not in this document yet, let me copy this bit.ly link out so folks can get there. And I'll put it in the chat. So if you would, everyone join me in that document because that has the steps and it has some of the credentials that we'll use. So the first thing the folks should do, if you haven't already, is create an account if you need and log into github.com. Because what we're going to do is we're going to basically copy, it's called forking. We're going to copy the repository that has this logic. So you have it in your own GitHub account. At that point, you own it, your version of that code. We're going to make a couple modifications to show the process of building a AI micro app. And then we're going to use the Streamlit account to deploy that micro app to the web. So you can get a website that's like this, be it your own subdomain. And again, it's your own subdomain. You can share it with whoever you want, and you have control of that. At that point, you can make changes, and they're in your own repository, your own website, essentially, is what you're doing. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into GitHub. So I will get there myself, and you're going to go to this repository here. And if you don't own this repository, let me just get to another one. If you don't own this repository, then you should have an option to fork. This button over here on the right, to fork your own copy of the repository. So when you're in Microapp templates, looks like several of you already been able to do it. You just click fork, leave the names the default, that's fine, and just create a fork, copy the main branch only, that's also perfectly fine. Okay, so you should have or be close to having a repository in your GitHub account. So the easiest way to get there is go back to your homepage of GitHub, and you should have your repositories on the left here, and one should say AI Microapp templates. If you're new to this, it's going to be the only one you have. And you click on that, and what you should see is your name or your username / AI Microapp template, like this here. And so I'm not going to show in detail the OpenAI key process, but you can look at their instructions for how to create a key. Essentially, you'll log into OpenAI. You do need to put a credit card in, but you pay for usage. It's very cheap if you're just testing, pennies, especially if you use some of the cheaper tools like 4.0 Mini. But when you're in here, you have your dashboard, and you have a section here for API keys, and you can just create a new secret key here and give it a name and create a secret key. I'm not going to do it because I've already done it, and that's the key that I shared with everyone here. Again, those instructions are well documented. If you don't want to create your own, just use the one that's in the file here. Okay, next we're going to go to Streamlit, which is the site that hosts this and gives us a web URL so we can show this to our friends right after this call, basically. If you go to the streamlit.io is the suffix there and sign in, then yours is going to look a little different than mine because I've made several of these. But you should have, once you're logged in, you should have the option to create an app up here in the top right. And when you click on create an app, you have the option to say I have an app or I want to create a new one. You're going to say I have an app. You will likely, and this is a piece that I haven't tested fully. You will likely have to connect to your GitHub account somehow. Is anyone going through that right now, and they can kind of explain what they're seeing when they authorize GitHub in their Streamlit account?
It actually prompts you for it. So it's just, and then when you click, yes, I want to connect them, it's like a authorization you have to give it.
Good, good. Hopefully everyone is getting there. Thank you very much. That's excellent. Yeah, so just give it that access, whatever it asks for. Thank you. So once you've authorized it, hopefully everyone can get here where you say create an app, and then you're on this screen, it says deploy an app. And here, there's a nice drop down where it gives you all the repositories that it can find in your GitHub account. And so you're going to pick the one that says AI microapp template, your fork of the repository we just forked. We need to change some of these. Yeah, so I have the same error here. So you're going
Okay.
to change that to main.py because it doesn't actually know the name of the file, interestingly. So main.py is the primary file that folks are going to run. Don't click deploy yet if anyone's going ahead. Don't click it yet because we need to do an advanced setting. Give your URL, give your app a URL that you'll remember. You can just do John's Microapps or something, put in your own name, something that's a little more memorable than the long string that it gives you. And then before you hit deploy, we have to go to advanced settings and we have to put in our OpenAI, and you can put at the same time the Claude keys as well. And I think that you need this config file. So do go back to the Google Doc and take all three of these lines, the OpenAI API key, the Claude API key, and the config file. I don't know if the config file is required. And so you go back to Streamlit, get back there, and paste those in, and it should look like this. Secrets should have your OpenAI API key, the Claude API key, and the config file. And the best place to get those is in the Google Doc because it has all three of them right there. Just copy all three as is and paste them right into secrets.
So if we are going to do this in the future, we do have to create our own key.
You have to create your own key. You'll have to go back into Streamlit and just change your key in the secrets. Yep. Same thing for Claude, same thing if you're going to use Gemini. All right. So if everyone has put in those secrets, you can now save them and hit deploy. And when you hit deploy, it should bring up the new tab that says, yeah, the app is in the oven. And when it's done, you should have a site that looks something like this. I think you'll start on the Ebola case study. But you should get to this. And this is a big milestone. So where we should be is folks should have their Microapps site, their URL. So go ahead and save that on your computer somewhere so you can get back to it. And now we're going to do the configuration bit. So we're going to configure a zodiac symbol calculator because it's a kind of easy to understand example of what is happening when we send a request to AI via this microapp, get a response back, and then what it means to customize something because the way that you might, the zodiac you might follow, if anyone does, might be different from the zodiac someone else's follows. All right, so where I want people to go is I want you to go back to GitHub, the homepage of your repository. So you should, again, see your username, AI microapp template, and you should see this list of all these config.py files. And what I want you to do is I want you to click on config_zodiac. And that brings up a config file that looks like this. And before we go there, before we edit this, I'm going to pull up this, the Streamlit application here. And you'll notice that at the very bottom of this, you have an option for the Zodiac symbol app. And you notice that it's throwing an error. And the reason that it's throwing an error is because we haven't configured it yet. So it has no configuration to go on. So what we're looking at here, switch over to GitHub, we're looking at the config file. And this is where I set up information about my app. So I've already given it a title, Zodiac symbol. I have given it an introduction. This is a demonstration app that demonstrates a user's Zodiac symbol, determines a user's Zodiac symbol. I've given a little how it works. So all this I've pre-filled in to save us time. And you'll notice there is a system prompt, but here is where, if you remember the talk about fields and phases, here is where we don't have any fields or any phases. We're not collecting any information from the user, and we are not sending any information to AI. So the next step is to get that. So in our Google Doc, the first or the second to last link at the bottom here is the code that we need for our Zodiac application. And the code that we need specifically is this phases code that I've highlighted here. So take a look at my screen and take a look at what I've highlighted. It's phases open the curly bracket, close the curly bracket, and it's everything in there. So go ahead and copy that. And you're going to go to your config_zodiac file in GitHub. And you're going to click this little pencil here. And when you click it, you should get an editable text editor. And you're going to replace the blank phases that you have here with what you pasted from that document. So go ahead and hit commit changes, this green button here. And you can just leave the default commit message, says update config file. And it'll save it essentially, and you'll end up back on that page. And once you do that, go ahead and go back to your Streamlit application page, and you should see that your Zodiac app has updated. You should see what my screen shows, which is what is your name, your month, birthday. We're going to take a brief break from the techie bits and just focus for a second on what we've just done here. What we have done is we've defined what we want this app to collect for information, and we've also defined how we want this app to talk to and get a response back from AI. If you look at what you just pasted in, or you can look at my screen, that's probably easier, you will see that we've said, okay, I want one phase, which is called name. I'm not going to go through some super detail because this gets into kind of Python dictionaries, but we have a phase. Actually, it's called user details. That's what we call that phase. And within that phase, there are three fields. We have a name field, we have a month field, and we have a day field. Our name field is a text input field. Our month field is a radio field, which are these bubbles. And our birthday field is a number input field. And you can see if you go to the app, that's exactly what we're getting. We have a text field, we have a month radio button, and we have a birthday field. And for those of you that do go back to this, is not something you need to memorize here, but if you go back to these and want to explore this, all of the fields that are supported right now are in this demo1 config file. So if you want to say, okay, how do I get the code for a text input field or a text area field, which is a bigger text input, or a radio field, you can just copy the fields from here. Yeah, don't do it right now, but as you play around with things, you may get to that level. If you haven't already, we can go ahead and try this. So we can say, name is John, birthday. This is what it should look like. You're on the zodiac symbol, you choose your birth month and your birth date, and it gives you your zodiac horoscope. Here's what's happening in the back end. We get to here. We're collecting from a user. We're collecting their name, the month they were born, and the day they were born. And from that, AI should be able to know someone's zodiac symbol. And so we're prompting AI and saying, my name is name. And when I put something in curly brackets like this, I'm taking the input from my user. So my name is name. If I put in John, it would be my name is John. I was born on the month of the birth month and the day. Please provide me my zodiac symbol and give a short horoscope for the day. That's the whole prompt, as well as the system prompt here. So we're giving a system prompt. But this is the whole prompt here. So when we submit with a phase, we're collecting the inputs from the user, sending that to AI, and the response is what AI is giving us back. And AI says, hello, John, since you were born October 30th, your zodiac sign is Scorpio, which is correct, and then gives a horoscope for Scorpio, right? Here's what we're about to do now. So we've just made a horoscope app. Several of us have. We made a horoscope app, and that's great. But the thing is that the way that I read horoscopes, or the star system that I follow, is not going to be the same as the system that everyone else follows. So the important thing of this is not that you can make one thing. The important thing is that these can be customized. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, this app is a good starter app, but I want to change this for my course, for my assignment, for my students. And we're just going to do that with a simple horoscope example. So back in the Google Doc, the very last link here is config zodiac v2. And if you open that, you will get a config file with some code. And I'll just point this out to you. You can look at my screen. Is before we had gotten name, month, and day. But now we're going to add two more fields, one for year and one for system. And it's going to let us choose between two different systems. Western Zodiac, all this stuff I learned for this particular app thing. I'm not typically a Zodiac person, but the different systems here. So you can choose the Western Zodiac system or the Chinese Zodiac system, because someone might be on the Chinese Zodiac system. And we've changed the prompt as well. So now that we have that new information, now we can change the prompt. We can say, my name is name, I was born month, day, and add the year. And then I can ask the AI, please provide my Zodiac symbol and give a short horoscope for the day according to the system that I choose, whether it's Western or Chinese. And again, probably to make this the easiest possible, if you have this config file open, config_zodiac_v2.py, select everything, copy everything, get to your GitHub repository, get to your config_zodiac file, edit it using the pencil, and once again, just delete everything and paste everything that you got from the config_zodiac v2 file. And once you've done that, hit save or commit changes. It's not save, it's commit changes. And then when it asks you to confirm, go ahead and confirm committing those changes. And when you do that, you should see that your Zodiac app has changed now. So now, in addition to asking your name and your birth date and your birth year, now we can choose, I want astrology on the the Chinese system. And it gives us, in Chinese astrology system, your Zodiac sign is the dragon and what it's associated with. So now we've customized our app. And by the way, this run cost us 2/100ths of a penny, 3/100ths of a penny. So could run this 30 more times and it would cost me 1 penny. So things like this that are small are very cheap when we're using something like 4.0 mini. I do want to show that, again, the importance here is not that we can create one app, it's that we can create many apps with this template and take an app and customize it for our students, our courses, etc. Okay, so that was a fun example. I want to show a more educational example. And I'm going to show this using my local computer as well, just so folks that would be working locally, which is definitely faster, it's just more technical, you can at least see how that runs. So I have an assessment in mind, which I'm calling Instructor Guided Critical Thinking, which is a writing assessment. I want my students to reflect on something that they've learned. I want to give them feedback on that reflection, and then I want them to improve their original reflection. And the way that works is like this. Once again, I have on my local computer, so it's going to look a little bit different. I have set up a template for this app. I gave it a title, I gave it an intro, I gave it how it works, and all that we can see shows up here. And I'm running this locally, but it shows up here in my app, right? But once again, I don't have any phases. I don't have any fields that I'm collecting. So we get an error when we get down to that point in the page. And so I've pre-created some of these. So I'm going to copy this over and talk about what these phases are doing and show them in action here. I want 2 phases. I want a phase where a student summarizes a lesson. I want them to enter a response, which my instructions are: explain your own words the multimedia principle in course development. Describe an example of how you might use the multimedia principle in practice. So I want them to explain something in their own words, natural language recognition. And then I want them to give a personal example of how they might use the multimedia principle in practice. I'm asking for 2 things here. And that's important because this phase is scored. This is an example of a scored phase. For feedback, this is the prompt that I'm sending to AI. I'm saying the user is about to define the multimedia principle as it pertains to online education, provide feedback for the user, make sure the user included a definition of multimedia principle, make sure the user described when to use animation versus static illustration, make sure the user includes their own example of how they might use the multimedia principle in practice, start with encouragement about what the user did well, then outline areas for improvement. If the user met all the guidelines, then offer your own suggestions about how they can improve their response. Do not end your statement with a question. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting the instructor voice in the phase instruction. As the instructor, I've just taught my students about the multimedia principle. And I want to check in their response that they've covered these 3 key topics. And I want to make sure, obviously, there's alignment between how I'm asking the question to students. I'm not just assuming they're going to read my mind. There's alignment with how I'm asking the question to the students and how I'm prompting the AI. And let's get into scoring. Let's show this and then let's get into scoring. So here's my first phase, summarize the lesson. I ask the students to explain your own words the multimedia principle in course development, describe an example. And then some further details, which says describe when to use animation versus static. And so I have a hard-coded response in here. The student obviously would type this, but for the sake of time, it's been hard-coded. And what the student has done here is they've described the multimedia principle in briefly but accurately, and then explained how they might use this in their own work, again, briefly but accurately, but they have missed the instruction about when to use animation versus static illustrations. So I'm going to submit this, and we're going to get a score. We're going to get feedback and a score. And so remember the prompt that I gave to AI. I said, start with supportive feedback and then provide areas for improvement. And here's what it gives me back. It says, you've made a good start by correctly defining the multimedia principle, and then gives me ideas for how to enhance my response, addressing specific contexts about when to use animation versus static, understanding when and where to apply these different types of visuals, including more detailed personal example, and then basically making these improvements would make your writing better. And it has given a score. We don't have a lot of time to talk about scoring, except to say that even I, who's very interested in kind of this world of AI scoring, realize that AI scoring is very experimental right now. I am not a proponent of AI grading because I see a ton of kind of inconsistencies with how AI scored. But what it has captured from this is that it accepts my definition of of the multimedia principle. It has not given me a point for a personal example. And obviously it hasn't given me a point for animation versus static because I didn't include it in my response. And just to go back to how I've configured, this is how the rubric looks for this. So I say, give the user a point if they provided an accurate definition of the multimedia principle. So I got a point for that. Give the user a point if the user has provided their own example of how they might use the multimedia principle in practice. I didn't get a point for that. So I would call that a mistake because I think as a user, I did actually provide that. And then finally, give the user a point if they have advised on when to use animation versus static images. The user has done this, they've gotten feedback, and now they're on to the second phase. And the second phase is about improving the response. It's the same question. We're asking the student to improve their response based on the feedback they received. And we're telling the AI, which does have a history of the conversation, we're telling the AI to check the same things it did before. Check the definition. Check whether the student has described when to use animation versus static. Check whether the user has included their own personal example. And we're also asking them to check if the user has improved their response, then applaud them for doing so. If the user did not change their response, then express some disappointment. And we're scoring based on the same rubric. So we're looking for improvement here. And again, the answer here is hard-coded, but I have improved it significantly. I have added the piece about static versus animated images, and I've expanded my personal example, and I forget if I've changed the definition. So I'm going to submit this as the student. And here is my feedback. So it recognizes you've made significant progress in understanding and articulating the multimedia principle. You've offered a clear and correct definition, appropriately tackled the consideration of animation versus static, and the practical example is excellent. Overall, your response demonstrates a thoughtful and informed approach. This is very positive. It's positive in large part because I have asked the AI to be positive in this one. In the first prompt, I asked the AI to specifically outline areas for improvement. In the second one, I don't think that I do that. I think that I basically applaud them for improving their earlier response, which is how I want this particular exercise to work. I may, if I'm an educator, I may want my exercise to work differently. Maybe I want them to go through 3 phases of improvement. Maybe I'm asking them about a totally different topic. I obviously probably want to have a different, if I'm talking about something else, I want to have a different scoring rubric. So all of these things are the kinds of things you can say, you know what? I want to have some sort of a writing feedback exercise that's powered by AI. I'll pull this configuration and I'll just modify it. I'll modify it for what I want my students to do. That is the goal of this application right now. It is a template that allows you to build and deploy your custom apps. So we're not relying on some SaaS product to make the perfect app for us. We have control over how we are prompting the AI. We can test it. We can test with different models. That is the goal here. So I hope this has at least given folks a sense of how these work, how to configure them. I think it's admirable that everyone has come here and tried it out. I think it does take a little bit of practice, and you'll hit some syntax errors and things as you go, but I would encourage you to give it a shot and reach out to me if you ever want to with, hey, John, I think your instructions aren't clear here, or hey, can we add this? Like, I am building this. It will always be free and open source. Like I said, there is a paid platform coming, but this particular tool will always be free and open source, and I will always keep it that way. And so if folks are using it, I'm happy to support it and keep on improving it.